Hi, thanks for joining me. Mindy Mandell here. So today we're going into our second video on the Timaeus. Now, if you haven't seen the first video, I do recommend you go back and watch that one first. So I'll put a link here. But we're going to go on from exactly where we ended off in that first video. And all of our translations, by the way, are by Robert Bury. So the conclusion that we reached at the end of that first video was this. This cosmos has verily come into existence as a living creature, endowed with soul and reason, owing to the providence of God. So we saw in that first video that for Plato, goodness is the supreme originating principle of the entire unfolding of the cosmos. And we're going to see that theme continuing as we go on. Here's a quick review, not a replacement for watching the first video, but just a few of the key points that explain that final quote, because we're going to continue from that point. So just a quick reminder for those of you who did watch the video last week, we saw this quote in last week's video, that it's clear to everyone that the artificer or creator God, and there he is in all of his happy glory, that his gaze was on the eternal. He was looking at the intelligible, I call them absolute realities. In universities, they're called the intelligible forms or ideas. And his gaze was on that eternal model. For the cosmos is the fairest of all that has come into existence, and he the best of all the causes. So that idea of goodness being what guides him. So the idea of similitude from one level to the next, is one realm to the next as it unfolds, that's one of the conditions for the unfolding of reality. So likeness is there as a condition. But we see that goodness is an even higher condition, because it's goodness that would compel God to want that similitude running through all. Okay, so having in this wise come into existence, it has been constructed after the pattern of that which is apprehensible by logos and phronesis and is self-identical. And that pattern that's being described there, again, the eternal model, the intelligible realities. And then the next step here is, this is the model to make the copy. We see here that he put reason within soul and soul within body as he fashioned the all. And again, it's so that the work he was executing might be of its nature most fair and most good. So this idea of goodness. And in metaphysics, whenever we're talking about the unfolding of reality or those realms prior to the physical, of course, we're beyond time and space, and so we have to stretch the vocabulary, the meaning of time words like prior or spatial words like beyond. And also the idea of a cause. It can be understood as the conditions that allow something to follow, the conditions that allow something to be. And so we see that likeness is one of the conditions here. Goodness, though, is the main one, the supreme originating principle. And that is one of the reasons why in this system, the first cause of all is often called the good. And that brought us then to this line, that it is endowed with soul and reason, and it's all owing to the providence of God. So carrying on from here, all of this that we just reviewed is being established, we must declare that which comes next in order. And so here's the next question to ask. In the semblance of which of the living creatures did the constructor of the cosmos construct it? So we want to talk a little bit more about that eternal model. And I want to focus on this phrase, living creatures. We did see it last week, but I didn't talk about it then. So now I want to talk about why he calls them living creatures. Why are the intelligible forms called living? Okay, imagine this circle represents the intelligible realm. Okay, now in Platonic metaphysics, then we talk about each realm as having these three qualities all working together. We talk about them separately, of course, because we have to, our linear thought process requires us to. But we have to try to put them all together because, of course, they're outside of time and space. So each realm has three qualities to it. It has existence. It has a kind of vitality or power. It's not living in the sense of breathing, of course, as animals breathe, but it has movement and power to it. In that sense, it has vitality. and it also has intellect. It has a sort of an activity, a type of intellectual power. Its power is intellectual in that, like, beautiful things are beautiful because of beauty itself, and just things are just because of justice itself. It exerts that power into its subsequence. So there are these three qualities, and so vitality has always been one of those qualities. It's not just existence and intelligence, but there's also this vitality. And Plato captured that with the idea of the intelligible forms being living creatures. And then he asks, but we shall affirm that the cosmos, more than aught else, resembles most closely that living creature of which all other living creatures, severally and generically, are portions. It's not a question, sorry. For that living creature embraces and contains within itself all the intelligible living creatures, just as this universe contains us and all the other visible living creatures that have been fashioned. Sometimes I forget the order of these quotes. Okay, going on though, he goes on to say that for since God desired to make it resemble most closely that intelligible creature which is fairest of all, and in all ways most perfect, he constructed it as a living creature, one invisible, containing within itself all the living creatures which are by nature akin to itself. So all the living things here in this realm have their intelligible form in that model, in the pattern. And now, here's the next question. Are we right then in describing the heaven as one? Or would it be more correct to speak of heavens as many or infinite in number? And he concludes that it must be one if it is to be framed after its pattern. So now he's going to explain why there is only one realm of intelligible forms and only one physical manifestation, the copy. He says that which embraces all intelligible living creatures could never be second with another beside it. For if so, there must needs exist yet another living creature, which should embrace them both, and of which they too would each be a part. In each case, this universe could no longer be rightly described as modeled on these two, but rather on that third creature which contains them both. In other words, if the realm of intelligible forms embraces all of the intelligible forms, then there couldn't be a second realm. What would be left over if this is all? And if it's not all, then it would take two to be all, or three if there was still more left over. So however many there are, 2 or 3 or 4, if these together make the all, then there must be something higher which would connect them. And so we would always look to that one. There must always be a one. Wherefore, in order that this creature might resemble the all-perfect living creature in respect of its uniqueness, for this reason, its maker made neither 2 universes nor an infinite number, but there is and will continue to be this one generated heaven, unique of its kind. Now that which has come into existence must needs be of bodily form, visible and tangible. Yet without fire, nothing could ever become visible, nor tangible without some solidity, nor solid without earth. Hence, in beginning to construct the body of the all, God was making it of fire and earth. Now, throughout this section where he brings in the elements, you always want to keep in the back of your mind the question of what exactly it is he's talking about here. Because if these are elements that are in the creation of our physical realm, it means that they are metaphysically prior to our realm. They are conditions that allow our physical world to be, which means that he's not talking about physical fire or physical earth, or what we think of as fire and earth. So that should just be a question to keep in the back of your mind. It will come up again in a later video, so just hold on to that one. But it is not possible that 2 things alone should be conjoined without a third, for there must needs be some intermediary bond to connect the two. And the fairest or most beautiful of bonds is that which most perfectly unites into one both itself and the things which it binds together. And to effect this in the fairest manner is the natural property of proportion, or some some translations have analogy. Now, the Greek word here, analogia, can be either analogy or proportion in English. We tend to use proportion for numbers and analogy for concepts, but as you can see that for the Greeks, the two were interchangeable. They can go back and forth very easily, which may be some of the attraction for why numbers were considered a doorway into the divine, or at least one way that makes it easier to see that, how you can go back and forth there. And the word analogia, the Greek word analogia, literally means the same logos or the same reasoning. So both sides of the analogy have the same reasoning going through them. And then here's his explanation of why analogy is key. And for the Platonists, it's really important to see here that analogy is built into the very unfolding of reality. It's not just a tool that humans use. It's actually built into reality itself. So analogy is not a human invention. It's a human discovery. And here's his explanation. It's rather confusing at first, but once we look at an example, we'll see it's actually quite clear. All right, whenever the middle term of any three numbers, cubic or square, is such that as the first term is to it, so is it to the last term. And again, conversely, as the last term is to the middle, so is the middle to the first. In those situations, then, the middle term becomes in turn the first and the last, while the first and last become in turn middle terms. And the necessary consequence will be that all the terms are interchangeable, and being interchangeable, they all form a unity. Okay, what is he talking about? Well, let's take a look at the basic format of a three-term analogy. So you can use numbers or concepts, doesn't matter. So as A is to B is to C. We have three terms here. And so our middle term we're calling B. And so for whenever the middle term of any three numbers is such that the first is to it, as A is to B, so is it to the last term, B is to C. And then you can also go backwards, as C is to B, so is B to A. As the last term is to the middle, so is the middle to the first. In these situations, now we can manipulate these, and we saw this before with the four-term analogy I did in a previous video. We can take our analogy as having two parts, and there's the same logos or same logic on both sides. As long as we do the same thing to both sides of our equation, we can come up with valid new analogies that can give us a new way to look at the information and give us some new insights. However, as we did with the four-term analogy, if we take the first to the first and the second to the second, we end up, in this case, with the exact same thing. A is to B as B is to C. So it doesn't make much sense to do that. But we may start with the second term. As long as we do that all throughout, it's perfectly valid. So B is to A as C is to B. And then we come up with this. And then here's what happens. The middle term, B, becomes in turn the first and the last. And the first and the last terms, A and C, become in turn middle terms. And then we can actually go ahead and make all of our different possible equations here, and we'll come up with this. There are only four. And then what happens here is that we can see that A can take any position, so can B, so can C. And so the necessary consequence will be that all the terms are interchangeable, and being interchangeable, they all form a unity. So there's a natural beauty and symmetry, really, to the three-term analogy. Now, I first studied this with Dr. Pierre Grimes, and he likes to point out the beauty and symmetry of this, that you can connect all the B's, and you get a circle. And if you connect the A's and the C's, you make this X, and then it's perfectly symmetrical. You can fold it horizontally, you can fold it vertically, fold it diagonally. It's symmetrical all around. So there's a natural beauty and symmetry to it. Okay, going on here, Timaeus says, now if the body of the all had had to come into existence as a plane surface having no depth, one middle term would have sufficed to bind together both itself and its fellow terms. But now it is otherwise. For it behooved it to be solid of shape, and what brings solids into unison is never one middle term alone, but always two. Thus it was that in the midst between fire and earth, God sets water and air. And I think maybe many of you are familiar with Pythagoras or like divine geometry, and you see that in the divine realms they tend to use triangles, whereas about the physical world they tend to use quadrilaterals, and Plato carried that on as well. So for these reasons and out of these materials, such in kind and for a number, the body of the cosmos was harmonized by proportion or by the same reasoning, logos, and it was brought into existence. These conditions secured for it amity, so that being united in identity with itself, it became indissoluble by any agent other than him who had bound it together. So again, there's that goodness, and you see a lot of the same terminology being used throughout: the idea of harmony, the idea of friendship or amity, the idea of it being united with itself, because the good is also the one, and the idea of unity is also very strong throughout. It's all held together by goodness. Now, of the four elements, the construction of the cosmos had taken up the whole of every one, and these were his intentions. First, that it might be, so far as possible, a living creature, perfect and whole, with all its parts perfect. Next, that it might be one, inasmuch as there was nothing left over out of which another like creature might come into existence. And further, that it might be secure from age and ailment. And then to summarize these, wherefore, because of this reasoning, he fashioned it to be one single whole, compounded of all wholes, perfect and ageless and unailing. And he bestowed on it the shape which was befitting and akin. Now at this point where he's bringing in shape, you need to be a little flexible in your thinking, because he's giving us imagery, but what he's talking about is beyond imagery. And so it's giving us like a cosmology that's in the form of a kind of mythology. And so it's all symbolical, and you have to go into this. It's kind of a meditation or a deep contemplation to try to see with your mind's eye what he's really describing here. Because this realm, as he's described it already, is only one, and there's nothing beyond it, which means it can't have shape, because having shape would be having borders or boundaries, and what he's describing is beyond boundary, having any boundaries. And so you have to work with it and kind of sit with it for a while and see what comes of this imagery. All right, with that in mind, here we go. As he bestowed on it the shape which was befitting and akin. And he bestowed on it the shape which was befitting and akin. Let's get this right. Now, for that living creature which is designed to embrace within itself all living creatures, the fitting shape will be that which comprises within itself all the shapes there are. Wherefore he wrought it into a round, in the shape of a sphere, equidistant in all directions from the center to the extremities, which of all shapes is the most perfect and the most self-similar, since he deemed that the similar is infinitely fairer than the dissimilar. Now, to stress this idea that there's nothing outside of it, he again is using physical characteristics to describe it. Of eyes it had no need, since outside of it there was nothing visible left over, nor yet of hearing, since neither was there anything audible, nor was there any air surrounding it which called for respiration, nor again did it need any organ whereby it might receive the food that entered and evacuated what remained undigested. And then going on with this sort of imagery, hands too, he thought, he ought not to attach unto it uselessly, seeing they were not required either for grasping or for repelling anyone, nor yet feet, nor any instruments of locomotion whatsoever. Okay, now we'll go on to say more about motion. For movement, he assigned unto it that which is proper to its body, namely that one of the 7 motions which specially belongs to nous and phronesis. Let me stop for a moment. So the 7 motions, 6 of them are physical only, forward, backward, side to side, up and down. But the 7th motion, we find it in our physical world, but also in the intelligible world. And that is the one that specially belongs to nous and phronesis. He spun it round uniformly in the same spot and within itself, and spinning within itself, we're going to find his key. And he made it move revolving in a circle. And all the other 6 motions, the ones that are physical only, he took away and he fashioned it free from their aberrations. Okay, why is spinning in a circle or spinning within itself considered a divine motion? Well, let's look again at this idea of each realm having this threefold quality. When you get into the later Platonists, like the Neoplatonists, especially Proclus, he really goes into great detail about this. But you can see that it's hinted at here in Plato as well, that each of these 3 parts has its own proper activity, if you will. So when we're talking about, and in the whole realm, it gets a little confusing here because, again, our linear thinking gets in the way of our understanding of this. But all 3 are working together all the time. But when we're talking about the whole realm as being, we're looking at that aspect of it which is always abiding in itself, the 3 parts together into one and abiding in silence within itself. When we talk about the whole as power or vitality, we're talking about it as proceeding towards intellect, proceeding outward. And when we talk about it as intellect, as the 3, we're talking about that which is intelligible within it, or intellectual within it, turning back and getting to know itself and looking at itself, looking to its source and knowing itself. And that motion, that circular motion that allows it to be intellectual and know itself, is what the Greeks call ousia. And so they actually have a word for this. It doesn't really translate well. This word is actually throughout this dialogue in many of them as well, but it's usually translated as either being or as essence. However, those words have kind of a static feeling to them, but ousia, it's a noun that's describing this intellectual action. And so you always want to keep that in mind whenever you're looking at these realms. And by the way, this threefold quality, it's throughout all of the realms. Also, we can talk about, Proclus takes each of these 3 parts and breaks it into 3 itself. So this being is also being, vitality, and intellect, and so on. And then also with each of the intelligible forms, for example, we can see that same threefold quality, like within beauty, within justice, within greatness, within smallness, the same threefold quality. It flows throughout all of the unfolding of reality. So that's the circular activity that he's talking about. Okay, such then was the sum of the reasoning of the ever-existing God concerning the God which was one day to be existent. And by the way, that's time terminology, one day to be existent. It just means that's the later realm of reality. That's the mythological way of talking about subsequent realms. Okay, whereby he made it smooth and even and equal on all sides from the center, a whole and perfect body, compounded of perfect bodies. And in the midst thereof he set soul, which he stretched throughout the whole of it. And there's my picture of soul. Doesn't it look like soul? And it's stretching throughout. And therewith he enveloped also the exterior of its body. So soul embraces the whole of the physical realm. And as a circle, revolving in a circle, he established one soul in solitary heaven, able of itself, because of its excellence, to company with itself, and needing none other beside, sufficing unto itself as acquaintance and friend. And because of this, he generated it to be a blessed God. So the idea of self-sufficiency, and again, the idea of friendship or amity that we've been seeing throughout. Now, here it's presented where like there's the physical realm and then soul was put inside of it and then envelops it. He wants to clarify, though, that we're being a bit loose with language here. Now, as regards the soul, although we are essaying to describe it after the body, God did not likewise plan it to be younger than the body, for when uniting them, he would not have permitted the elder to be ruled by the younger. But as for us men, or humans, even as we ourselves partake largely of the accidental and casual, so also do our words. God, however, constructed soul to be older than body and prior in birth and excellence. Since she, soul is feminine in the system, she was to be the mistress and ruler, and it the ruled. So earlier we saw this picture showing the unfolding of the realms of reality. We can line them up like this to show this is the flow. And then if we add the idea of vitality, both in the model and in the copy, then we have these 6 realms. And these are the 6 realms that the Neoplatonists picked up and describe in much greater detail. But we can see that even here in Plato, it is already unfolded for us. And then to give you a little teaser for next week's video, this is where we're going. That he made soul of the materials and in the fashion which I shall now describe. And that's where it goes on, and that's where we're going to pick it up next week. So I do hope you found that helpful. And if you have any questions or comments that you want to leave for me or for others watching the video, you can leave them below. Also, I do have an email address in the description box. And as always, if you like what you saw, I would appreciate a thumbs up. And also, please think about sharing with your friends and subscribing. I do put out a new video once a week, and so you'll get a notification if you subscribe and you hit that little bell icon. You can get the notification, and you'll know when I have a new video. So thank you very much, and I do hope that you'll join me next week.